Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the series Pathways Out of Poverty in Northern Virginia. I'm James Foster of Lewinsville Presbyterian Church in McLean, Virginia, who along with Redeemer Lutheran Church, our neighbors down the Chain Bridge Road, are sponsoring today's conversation on affordable housing with panelists Christopher Fay of Homestretch and Carmen Romero of Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. The moderator of today's event is Lewinsville's own Jim Edmondson of the E&G Group. Thanks to all of you for being here today to share your deep experience on this topic and to act as witnesses as to what can be done. Now, in the tradition of many faith communities, today has particular significance as All Hallows Eve, or the day before the traditional All Saints Day, which for some 800 years has celebrated the lives of those who've gone before, and as Reformation Sunday, which celebrates the grace and mercy we believe anyone can receive, and marks our faith as one that is continually reforming, as exemplified by the efforts of a German monk who some 500 years ago critiqued prevailing Christian practices and sparked a revolution. One practice that continues today, both in civic and in religious settings, is the invocation. And for this purpose, I will now offer a prayer, a tribute to an imperfect man who lived not far from here on the banks of the Potomac, whose words express the hopes and fears of our nation then and now. I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have the United States in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to the government, to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another, for their fellow citizens of the United States at large, and particularly for their brethren who have served in the field. And finally, that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without a humble imitation of whose example in these things, we can never hope to be a happy nation. Amen. Well, in just a moment, I'll turn the virtual podium over to Jim Edmondson to introduce the panel and get this show on the road. But first, I would request a few more minutes of your time for describing the series, providing context, and thanking some of the folks who made it happen. This series was initiated to identify and lower the barriers to opportunity facing our neighbors in Northern Virginia, to seek out policies and programs that can achieve this end, and to support these efforts in tangible ways. I'd like to thank Phil Church of Lewinsville for his leadership in developing the series and pushing it forward. Today's event is part of a long tradition at Lewinsville of bringing together faith and public policy, an effort championed by Ray Martin and our other members of the Faith and Public Policy Committee. It overlaps with other ministries at Lewinsville, including our Matthew 25 initiative against racism and poverty, our commitment as an Earth Care congregation, our encouragement of civil discourse through the Better Angels initiative, and decades of mission trips building houses with Habitat for Humanity. Redeemer Lutheran Church is a natural partner with Lewinsville, sharing our Reformed traditions and a desire for action. I want to thank Liz Scheffler and Judy Cohagen of Redeemer for all their help, and invite Judy to the virtual podium to say a few words. Judy?
Good afternoon, everyone. Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in McLean, just down the road from Lewinsville, is glad to be involved with that church in sponsoring this series on topics related to pathways out of poverty. Last year, 3 days after George Floyd was killed, our pastor, Sandy Kessinger, invited members and friends of the congregation to study our national church's statement on racism. The individuals who answered her invitation soon expanded that initial conversation by educating ourselves about other aspects of social injustice, and the factors that contributed to the absence of equity for many individuals in our area and in our nation. This anti-racism ministry continued the education aspect by sharing what we had learned with our congregation via various ways of communication. Meanwhile, we learned via discussion of members of Tysons Interfaith that Phil Church and others at Lewinsville were hoping to focus on factors specifically affecting individuals who worked in the Tysons area. Our ministry team was ready to move on from education to action, looking for ways our congregation and individual members could do things by sharing our time and skills with area groups already addressing such issues and by being advocates for change. So, Pastor Kessinger discussed possible collaboration with Lewinsville's Pastor Ramsey. Phil and his colleagues met with our ministry team to discuss how we could work together. As James said, Liz Scheffler and I are the Redeemer contacts for supporting Phil and his colleagues in these pathway discussion sessions. Our congregation continues in its support of Homestretch. Those of us who live in Arlington are familiar with the work of the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. So we certainly look forward to today's discussion with representatives of these two organizations and thank them for joining us this afternoon. James?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judy. Finally, a virtual meeting would not be complete without a technology guru or two. So I want to thank Maria Nijar of GW and Betty McElroy of Lewinsville for lending us your tech skills for this event. Thank you. The next episode of this series will take place on December 5th and focuses on a key barrier to escaping poverty: financial literacy. It will feature Anna Maria Lusardi, a global expert on the subject, who directs the Financial Literacy Center at GW, along with Maria Jose Cantoni, who directs BrightPath's Financial Empowerment Center in Alexandria. If you miss an episode, you can catch it later on Lewinsville's YouTube channel. Now for some context on today's topic. I teach economics and international affairs at GW, where much of my research has studied poverty and inequality, initially using a monetary definition that says, you are poor because you don't have enough income. But almost 25 years ago, Professor Amartya Sen reconceptualized poverty as capability deprivation, preventing you from doing what you want to do and being what you want to be. This naturally goes far beyond income to a notion of poverty that includes education, health, living space, freedom, and dignity, and so is fundamentally multidimensional. And where the pathways out of poverty require multiple private and public investments in people, not just temporary transfers of income. We formulated a metric called the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, to capture this idea in a practical way, and MPIs have now been implemented by dozens of developing countries and by the UN and the World Bank, providing a metric around which private and public investments are being coordinated to achieve Goal 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals on poverty. The main point I wish to emphasize here is that no matter how you define and measure poverty, the way out requires removing barriers across multiple dimensions. Now, wait a minute, you might say. These countries you're referring to are developing countries. This is Northern Virginia, Nova, where 3 of the 10 richest counties in America are located, with families that have the highest median income, and even adjusting for the high cost of living. Surely, poverty is no serious issue here. Well, the median income only tells you where the middle of the distribution is located. That's not informative about what's happening at either end. Inequality makes poverty inevitable in 2 ways. It places more people at the extremes, leaving many at the lower end. But less apparent is how inequality impacts the availability and cost of the products poor folks buy and use. For example, as the wealthy shift to private schools, funding for public schools can suffer. impacting inequality of opportunity for the next generation. And the same is true for other social services and public goods like public transport or health insurance. Wealthy neighborhoods attract a multitude of grocery options, while poor areas are food deserts with food outlets that encourage unhealthy diets. Likewise, high-end housing attracts investment dollars, displacing affordable housing, lowering availability, and disproportionately raising rental rates facing the poor. With limited access to credit, poor folks are driven to unsustainable borrowing practices like payday lending, and the list goes on. So how to attack poverty in a way that lasts? The only answer I know is investments in people, ensuring that they have the basic tools they need to pull themselves out of poverty. Now, why affordable housing? In January of this year, the research arm of the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia, CFNV, issued a troubling report entitled Unequal Burden, Low-Income Northern Virginians Face the Country's Most Severe Cost Burden. It reports that in 2019, 2/3 of the region's low-income households, those with income below 2 times the poverty line, spent more than half their gross income on housing, far above the national average and even ahead of the high-cost areas like New York City, Los Angeles, and Seattle. Moreover, just 13% of NOVA low-income households had sufficient income to afford their monthly housing costs. So as a rule of thumb, households that spend more than 1/3 of their budget on housing are considered to be cost burdened. Part of the problem, the report noted, is the limited supply of affordable housing, which according to the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance is explained in part by a regional rental market that has shifted to constructing higher cost units. These results were drawn from pre-pandemic data, but unfortunately the economic headwinds have not abated. Occupations that experience the most severe housing burden are predominantly in roles deemed essential during COVID-19, including teachers, construction workers, retail salespersons, drivers, and restaurant staff. They also tend to have lower pay, unpredictable schedules and hours, and often come with few benefits. Still, there are housing solutions that offer promise, and objectives of today's discussion is to help discern courses of actions that can be taken by each one of us to help remove the barriers affecting our neighbors. Today's moderator knows a thing or two about affordable housing. Jim Edmondson has over 30 years experience in real estate development and finance. The E&G Group, of which he is principal, rehabilitates apartment buildings and develops, owns, and manages affordable apartments. Jim was a founding member of APAH, an affordable housing advocacy group. His full bio can be found in the program. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Jim Edmondson for today's conversation. Jim. Hey, Jim.
Yep. Am I able to be heard?
We can hear you loud and clear.
All right, wonderful. Thanks. I'm delighted to be a part of this. I'm delighted to be a member of Lewinsville with an organization like the group that has organized this event and others. We've got two excellent members of a panel to discuss. One is literally my partner in an affordable housing transaction, already mentioned by Kay. Carmen Romero is president of Arlington Partnership of Affordable Housing. Christopher Fay is a principal officer of Homestretch, another nonprofit organization that does wonderful work in Northern Virginia. Those two nonprofits are different from my own experience. I'm a for-profit guy, but our mission orientation is the same. Carmen, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself further?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, James, for that wonderful overview on the issue. My name is Carmen Romero, and I'm the President and CEO of the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. We are a nonprofit that has been around a little over 30 years, and we are 36 people strong based in Arlington. But 3 years ago, we went regional to meet the larger regional need of affordable housing. That is, we realized it didn't have a border. It really was folks more and more getting pushed out of Arlington, going to other parts of the DMV, and we wanted to be there at their side, building housing there too. We have a 30-person board of directors, of which I see we have a former board member, Pat McGrady, who's now a resident in Fairfax, as well as Kathy Panfil, who chairs our resident services board committee. And APAH's mission is threefold. We focus on the preservation as well as the building of affordable housing. We also focus on implementing resident services program that promote both stability as well as opportunity. We'll talk a lot about that today, I hope. And thirdly, we focus on policy. So this invitation today really is right at the cross section of where we feel called to do our work. And I look forward to kind of engaging in the discussion questions that Jim will be putting out shortly.
Christopher, how about you?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Christopher Fay, Executive Director of Homestretch. Homestretch has also been around a little over 30 years. And our mission is to empower homeless families with children to secure permanent housing and to attain the skills, knowledge, and hope they need to become economically self-sufficient. So of course, housing is a big part of what we do. We own or rent, I think now 54 units of housing in 3 jurisdictions, which would be Fairfax County, City of Falls Church, and Arlington County. Essentially what we do is we take a homeless family who is in crisis, put them in a home, and then surround them with services to help propel them out of poverty. So it's a lot of work to remove barriers and open doors of hope and possibility, training, education, debt repair, etc. And of course, you can't be helping a homeless family without thinking about housing and thinking about inequality. So I look forward to talking more about that.
Thanks very much. North Virginia is blessed with a number of very strong not-for-profit and for-profit developers who view it as their goal to add to the stock and to preserve the existing stock of affordable housing. I think the 3 folks you're hearing from today are examples of those. Maria, could you put up the table? Are we there yet?
Can everybody see the document?
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
This is not meant to scare people off of the importance of this tasks that we undertake, but to simply indicate that it's a daunting problem. Both Carmen and Christopher made indirect reference to a federal policy idea called Housing First that seems to be driving some aspects of the provision of affordable housing now, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Doing new housing in a very expensive market like Northern Virginia is evident here. I've put up some numbers, the 3 primary components of the cost of a new apartment, and this is not an individual apartment, this is an average over a cost of a larger apartment property. 100 units might not be unusual to try to do. The land costs might be $40,000. Construction costs, and they haven't been helped any by the supply backlog that you've all heard about now, could be $200,000 per unit on the average. And all kinds of other costs are built in there: financing costs, paying fees, payments for the use of the credit facilities that exist. The total cost is about $340,000 per unit. So if you've got a 100-unit project, you're talking about well over $30 million. How do you find the money for that? Well, if you're going to charge $1,000 or $1,100 or $1,200 a month rents, you can't pay for it with traditional financing. You've got to have a lot of money that looks like it's either, from our perspective, free or very low cost. You see a total of $340,000 worth of sources there. Some of it comes from investors who use tax credit investments to justify putting money into these projects. Local capital subsidies, very low cost money that comes in Northern Virginia from one of the municipalities. Arlington has been very good at doing that. Loudoun County has stepped up to the plate. And fortunately, Fairfax County is now putting more money in those programs. We can get some traditional debt that we have to pay interest and amortization on each month, call it first mortgage debt of about $100,000. And then there's some other stuff that gets built in there. But when you're talking about taking on a long-term obligation of over $300,000 or for a single unit, or well over $30 million for 100 units of housing, that's a major undertaking. And a lot of people have to be involved. Many of the people who would reside in those properties don't make enough income even to pay the relatively inexpensive rent for these projects, which, say, for a one-bedroom unit might be $1,000. The rent total that we might need in order to operate the property is $1,800. Maybe a minimum wage worker can contribute $500 per month. That means we've got to have a rental subsidy of well over $1,000. In this example, I've used $1,300 per month, which is an annual subsidy requirement of over $15,000 per unit, per household. Those numbers get very large, very fast in the aggregate. For how many years is that required? Well, a lot of years. And it could be 15 years or more. It could be permanent. It's a problem because every local government gets federal money towards these rental subsidies, but never enough. And there's competition for that. This only addresses housing costs. We're ignoring the case management costs of some of the people who are going to occupy these units. We're ignoring their health care costs, much of which they can't afford. We're ignoring daycare, education, and other needs. This is a daunting economic challenge as well as a programmatic challenge. And with that in mind, as a kind of a background, let's go to some of the more particular housing-oriented questions that we think will be important to address. I'd like to ask both Carmen and Christopher of their perspectives as to the importance and relevance of the availability of affordable housing in order to begin for households the movement out of poverty. Carmen, you might address that first.
Sure. Thank you, Jim, for the question. So the perspective APAH brings to this problem is one of really trying to come up with ways to have scalable solutions to a crisis of this magnitude. We have 2,000 apartments that is home to 4,500 people, of which approximately 1,400 of them are youth and children, about 300 to 400 are seniors. Our average income, these are working families, 75% of them, the average income across our portfolio is about $40,000 a year. People working 2 or 3 jobs trying to stay in the DC area. Well, the reality is when the pandemic hit, people went from getting by and being able to pull it all together. But even the people in affordable housing, once the pandemic hit, had to go into their savings account because they had to stop working those hours because they had to stay home and take care of their kids. Or maybe they got sick, or maybe their employer cut back on hours. So we've been in an incredible crisis for the last 18 months, and our folks need help. They're resilient. They worked hard, they got through, the first part of the pandemic, but we're still in it. Our focus has been, how do we keep people housed? Because you can't have a stay-home order if you don't have a home. So our first goal was, let's keep everyone housed. We extended our eviction moratorium until December 31st of this year, 2021, to give us time to get the federal dollars in the hands of our residents. So we view it as housing stability is the core of it. But we also know that we need to help our families, and we have seniors who faced isolation, food insecurity, and other challenges during the pandemic. So we have a group of folks at APAH, it's up to 12 people now. We expanded our kind of social work, social service navigation team from 4 people to 12 in the last 100 days, so that we are helping people come out of the pandemic, we hope, stronger. Same thing for the youth that have had, 2 years of trying to do school at home, often in an apartment without the right Wi-Fi, without the right equipment, and their parents maybe not being able to do what so many other folks had, is the ability to kind of homeschool them. And we are now focusing on trying to expand after-school tutoring programs to try to help with learning loss. Kathy Panfield started of her, outside of her work at APAH, a pod at one of the churches next door, the Arlington Presbyterian Church, which we are co-located with. So we've had many folks start up different initiatives to help our residents. But what we're hoping to do as we look forward is, how do we get to scale? How do we make sure that every one of those 1,400 kids that live at APAH have the same opportunities that that my children have? Access to 529s, pathways to college, ways to get back if they've had learning loss. So we are very deep, and fortunately, we're fortunate to recruit a new leader from the Midwest who's a professor of social work to help us design impact programs, so that now we can start taking on pilots that will include, IDA savings accounts. So for every dollar someone puts in an account, how do you get $7 matching to encourage people? Because the research says that if you start saving for college when you're 5, your chances go up exponentially of someday going to higher ed. So that's where the future is going. It's not just about the housing. Housing is a social determinant of health. We need safe and stable housing, that's a given. But I want to make sure we are focusing and putting our eyes forward beyond that, and making sure that we are really in where are we building it? Let's build it where there's high opportunity, in places where there's transit, where there's low crime, where there's high performing schools, where they can walk to clinics and grocery stores and libraries and parks. How do we make sure it's service enriched with all those services I just talked about, right? Including fitness centers, playgrounds, classrooms to do some of these after school tutoring, opportunities for our residents to age in place with senior housing, that we now have 5 of those developments on the books, and we broke ground last week. Pat Grady spoke at that with us, and that's in the Lee District of Fairfax. So, I'm feeling like we are kind of at this inflection point, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. We have affordable housing is finally getting the attention we needed. I think as a result of the pandemic, people are focused on the essential workers and the folks who really helped us get through the pandemic. But now is the time to see, are people really going to step up and help us? And because all of these programs that I talked about are unfunded. We are right now fundraising for this, and you really can't just rely on charity to do it. We need sustainable funding tools for the services component to do it. In terms of building the housing, Jim mentioned the federal low-income housing tax credit program, and we are very fortunate that we have a federal tool that's been around since the 80s. It's bipartisan, that right now Congress is looking to potentially expand, and I pray they do, because that would, that is, really the linchpin to us being able to. I mentioned we have 2,000 homes today. We have 500 under construction. We have 5 buildings. We have 1 in Fairfax, 1 in Loudoun, 1 in Arlington, 1 in Montgomery County, and I'm forgetting one. Ooh, that's not good. So we have 5 under construction today. Oh, I'm sorry, the next one in Arlington that we break ground on in 30 days. So, the tools are there, and I think the municipalities are stepping up. But The reality is we're still not meeting the goal, even with the best efforts. The Urban Institute has said in this region, we need about 250,000 affordable homes by 2030, affordable to people making middle to low income. So all of this work that we're doing to move it forward, we're just scratching the surface. We're nowhere near the goal. So I guess as we kind of have this conversation today, I think one of the things we need to do is hold ourselves accountable for how do we meet the real need as documented by the research. And, you know, we're all very proud of the contributions we're making, building a project here, building a project there. And that's important because we are providing housing to several hundred people at a time. But what we really need is both housing, but we also need expansions of things like housing choice vouchers that people can use. And frankly, people wait 8 years to get a Section 8 voucher in Northern Virginia. 8 years. Can you imagine waiting 8 years for help? That is incredible. And that is one of the things that is trying to be moved forward right now in Congress is how do we expand that program? Because together, if we're doing both things, we're producing new affordable housing, but in the meantime, we're giving people vouchers so they can go in the marketplace and have some subsidy help. There's not going to be one way to solve this problem. We need kind of a multifaceted approach, and there's really great proposals on the table right now that if folks are interested in getting involved, it's advocacy to your congressmen, to your senators, saying, where are you on this legislation that's out there? This is important to solving a crisis in our community, a moral crisis. And I was getting urgent emails on Friday. How do you get the word out? And so I would love to, at some point, maybe later in the presentation, others figure out if folks are interested, how we mobilize some energy around some of these measures.
Thanks very much, Christopher. Your focus at Homestretch is somewhat narrower than the focus of APAH and some of the other developers. Tell us a little bit more about your work and how essential it is to relieve the problems faced by homeless families.
Thank you. Yes, by the way, I really endorse and embrace what Carmen said, and I'll get into a little bit about the importance of services that she was calling for. But our focus group are people that are at the bottom of the economic ladder and have suffered some kind of crisis that have actually knocked them completely off their feet. So when we say a homeless family, what does that mean? It means usually it's a mom. We have some dads, so we're not exclusively for women, but the reality is in homelessness, if there's children involved, 90% of the people we serve are single moms, 95% of the adults are women. Most of them have at least one child. Some of them have 4, 5, 6, 7 children. And so they're talking about a parent and children who have not only have no home, but they have been referred to us by a shelter because the shelter could not help them. So the people that are sent to us are considered by our local shelters as being the hardest cases. They have the highest debt. They have the worst credit. They have the fewest skills. They might have real barriers in terms of language. At least 50% of the families that come to us have some kind of documented disability. It might be brain damage from a beating, from domestic violence. It might be a learning disability. It might be a physical disability. Sometimes there's disabilities with the children that require a parent to stay home with the children. And of course, they are, as several of you have already mentioned, one of the most terrible things that happens to people in crisis who are poor is they're preyed upon by lenders and they end up in debt. And it's very, very difficult for someone who is poor and in crisis to pull themselves out of debt. They actually need an advocate to step in who knows how to work the system. So one of the dynamic things we do is we help them set aside money, save money, pay off their debts. We have a full-time credit counselor that advocates for them. We do their taxes. We apply for every possible scholarship so they don't incur any new debt while they're with us. And slowly and systematically, we see that their credit score goes up, debt goes down, and they graduate with significant savings. But let me get to this. The essential point is people who get into this situation have so many barriers, the compound, multiple complex barriers in their path that they really don't know how to navigate. They certainly are not going to be thinking about paying off an old debt because they're not even sure how they're going to pay for their children's food that night or the shoes that their little toddler has just outgrown. They need the intervention of an organization like Homestretch, who is going to systematically go through and look at all the barriers in their path and help clear them away and open doors for them. So I'll give you another example is most of the families that come to us, one of the reasons that they're poor and in crisis is they don't have the job skills that are requisite for the kind of jobs in our community that will pay enough for them to afford housing. They have a lot of jobs for them. They could get a job in a McDonald's, or they could get a job as any number of sort of service organizations where they get paid a pittance, and they might even have to hold 2 or 3 jobs and be working 50 or 60 hours a week and still not have enough to pay that rent. So what they need is an opportunity to acquire a skill, which actually, if you think about this, if you're working 50 hours a week, how are you possibly going to go to school? And how are you possibly then going to pay your rent if you don't work all those hours? They need an organization like ours that's going to step in, pay their rent for them, or pay at least most of the rent for them, give them the time, set up childcare, transportation, so they can actually go to school, they can get to class, they can finish that degree or that certification, which is going to drive their income up. I think that the main thing that I would say what Homestretch is trying to do is we're trying to create an ascent out of crisis and out of poverty. And that means we have to be able to create individualized case plans on each one of these families that does that. One family might make it through Homestretch in a year. Let's say you have a mom who is a victim of domestic violence, and all she really needs is a chance to sort of pull herself together, recovers from trauma. She might have had some college. You can help her finish that certification. She might get through in a year. You have another mom who has never even finished high school, maybe doesn't know the language very well, has 6 kids. She's going to have a completely different pathway, and it's going to take more time. So our goal is to create those individualized case plans for each family. Now, think about this. Carmen talked about having a couple thousand apartments. We only have 54 homes. So we're a relatively small organization in order to do it this way. So every community needs one of us, or 2 or 3 of us, in order to help a family escape poverty. We're doing it at a very small scale because that's what these families need. They need that kind of individual attention. But we're a drop in the bucket when you think of the scale of the problem. But the good news is if you do it the way we do it, most of the families succeed. We've had outcome studies conducted by George Mason University, George Washington University, and we're about to have a study with the help of the University of Virginia that looks at our outcomes. And the previous outcome studies have shown that 90% of the families that go through Homestretch are able to move into housing that they can afford. And 95% of those, after 2 to 5 years, are still housed and employed and never return to homelessness. So what does that say? It says if you invest in people that are thought of by the system as having too complex of problems to help, if you give the right investment to them, they will soar. So, I think it was Thomas Edison said that if we all lived up to our potential, we would literally astound ourselves. That's what we're trying to do, is give an opportunity for these families who are accustomed to loss and disappointment to actually open the doors, provide them with the skills, provide them with the support so they can achieve these things on their own with a lot of help, but on their they really ascend out of poverty. I think one of the reasons, let me go back to affordable housing for a second. I think one of the reasons why we never have enough affordable housing is the system is set up that ties the hands of the developers and the organizations like Carmen's, that they don't actually get the resources they need to build in the services or build in pathways for people to move up. As a matter of fact, I'm very grateful to HUD for what they do, but I actually think they're part of the problem, and I won't go into that in detail, but I do think they're part of the problem because they actually make it very hard for organizations like Carmen's to build in these steps of support for the families so they can actually exit. Another thing is, the way our system works is there's strange disincentives built into it that encourage somebody who's just got a housing choice voucher, say, or another kind of affordable unit. They don't want to jeopardize their eligibility. They might actually turn down a promotion because they're afraid if they lose that affordable housing unit, there's going to be a gap between what they are able to pay now and what they would need for market rate housing. That's why we have to think as a community, especially as faith communities, we have to think about both providing the housing and the pathway out of poverty. We have to be able to think about every one of these people that are caught in this crisis as if they are our brother or our sister, and they deserve the same kind of love we would give to our brother and sister. That's what we try and do at Homestretch. I have to say, there are moments and glimmers of hope. On the call today are Jerry and Harriet Hopkins from Fairfax Presbyterian Church. And one of the cool things that's going on with us right now is an attempt in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, Home Aid of Northern Virginia, Fairfax Presbyterian, and Homestretch to build housing on the land they own. And they're doing this all on a whisper and a prayer, in the sense they've decided we're going to go out, we're going to raise the money, we're going to do this as an act of faith to live out our call as Christians. We believe it is our call to step forward and do this. And it's a unique collaboration for nonprofit organizations, including a church and its property, to be able to develop housing. And they're doing this without the tax credits, because the tax credits would actually limit how this is done. That's a sad scenario when the tax credits are helpful in one way, but harmful in another. So I'll stop because I don't want to dominate, but.
One just follow up, Christopher. Give us a little more information about how these households that you wind up serving find their way to you. I mean, it's just, in some respects, they've won the lottery. If you choose them,
it's
really
in an odd sort of way, that's true. We're the only organization that designed the way we are in the entire Northern Virginia area. And that's with possible exception of Hope and Home in DC. But the unique thing is we have the freedom to design our services and our whole model around the needs of the families rather than around the demands of a funder. In order to do it the way we've done it, we actually forego federal and state funding. We only have 2% of our budget comes from any government source. But because we can do it this way, then we can create a service-rich environment. So how it happens is currently the shelters practice what's called rapid rehousing, which is part of the whole housing first philosophy. What happens to a family is they go into a shelter, and the shelters have a lot of money that they can use to rapidly house someone. So what does that mean is they take that family, put them in a home, give them a short-term subsidy, offer some voluntary services. At the end of that subsidy, the subsidy ends, and the hope is that the family has recovered from whatever trauma or they've acquired skills and they can take it over. But rapid rehousing lasts usually less than a year. So if you take someone who doesn't even have a high school diploma, how are they, and they have very few skills, might have very little education, how are they going to get from there to a job that's going to earn them $60,000, $70,000 a year in a year? It just doesn't work for a lot of people. So what happens is the families that can't be rapidly housed because they have too much debt, they have chronic health conditions, they have trauma because of this terrible violence that was inflicted upon them, they have too many children, any number of these scenarios, those families are sent to Homestretch. And yet, this is the cool thing. In the last 10 years, our graduates from Homestretch have become nurses, teachers, accountants, chefs, social workers, pharmacy techs, veterinary assistants. We had one couple open a restaurant in Old Town Alexandria. We had one become a licensed pharmacist, another become a licensed gynecologist. Just this last year, we had 2 women graduate with over $30,000 in savings, credit scores of 750, and they're both going to become homeowners. So from homelessness to home ownership in 2 years. If you do it this way, if you invest in the family properly, just like we'd want to invest in our own children, people can really, succeed. But I do want to say we have a huge array of services for these families. So we have our own licensed preschool. We have our own employment center. We provide scholarships to these families. We help with childcare and transportation. And we have this very vigorous credit counseling program that helps people get out of debt and save money, and the whole financial literacy program that's built into that. And in November, we're opening a free medical clinic. So to have this kind of thing all surrounded around the family is one of the reasons they can succeed.
Carmen, most of your residents are not in the same straits that Christopher just described, but they're, by Northern Virginia standards, they might be, quote, poor or low income, and yet many of them have incomes that are $40,000, $50,000. What are you seeing about the availability of affordable housing for some of these households to raise their economic standing over time? Is that something you track?
We do, and I do, out of the 2,000 units, we do set aside about 10% of them to be in partnership with groups that are helping people come out of homelessness. Because as Christopher mentioned, we want to be part of that continuum of housing too. So while 90% of our housing is for folks who may be taking that next step, right? If you you go from the homelessness to the shelter to maybe being in a nonprofit that's helping you make that pivot, we want to be part of that solution too. So we will work with groups that have victims of domestic violence, groups where there's intellectual disability of some type, and we will do something called a memorandum of understanding with that organization, and they will refer people to APAH, and they will, we will have, intense services, and we'll have in that MOU an ability for that partner to come into our buildings and provide services to allow that person to make the next step and be independent and be part of that continuum. But that is around 10%. We're trying to increase that over time. But for the moment, it's been around 10%. So I would love to talk to Christopher at some point if he's looking for units, and I love everything you've described.
Yeah, I would love to have a separate call with you, Carmen.
Yeah, so I think this is great. You're making connections, Jim, between us here. But in terms of tracking outcomes for the rest of our residents, yes, we are very focused on, resident-centered services and really working individually. One of the things we do when someone moves into an APAH building is have a one-on-one 40-minute consultation with one of our resident services coordinators to interview them. What chronic health conditions do you have? Do you have health insurance? What languages do you speak? Do you want to learn? If if English is not your first language, do you need to be enrolled in English classes? What's your highest level of education? Do you have an interest in taking certain additional classes to get a certification? If you're a senior, do you have a family support network locally? Are you, do you feel isolated? You name it. How many kids do you have? Do you have access to daycare or preschool? And it's about, a 7-page intake. And the goal there is that we can then in turn develop a set of programs in that community itself that responds to the need of that demographic. We think it's very important to center ourselves around what our residents want. I think for far too long, affordable housing was kind of viewed as almost paternalistic. Like we are here as saviors to solve the lives of low-income people, and we are not. That's not what we want to be. We want to listen to the resident voices and let them tell us how we partner and what we need to bring in to enrich and to give opportunity. And we are launching, November 1, resident council that is going to be represented. We have 19 properties now, representation across all of our portfolios, so that in addition, we have members of our board that are residents, of which Pat was one of them. But this is an extra level of input that we can foster on a monthly basis in real time to get a sense for, like I mentioned, one of the things we're interested in piloting is individual development accounts so that people can save to send their child to college, start their own business, buy a home, right? Well, as we design that program, we want to have input from the residents themselves, because frankly, there may be some residents that aren't as interested in home ownership. They feel that that is, not the way they want to build wealth. So if they'd rather focus on job training, we have plenty of partnerships that we can focus more there. I'd say, as we look to tracking data and outcomes, I think that is really something that we are very interested in doing, and frankly, a more robust way in partnership with universities. We've got a very good relationship with George Mason. They're across the street from us at one of the projects we have under construction. They've been very supportive of the APAH mission, as well as, other groups that have stepped up and said, especially now that we have a master's of social work running the resident services program, what's the ability for us to, as we talk about social services being a constraint, right now we have a staff of 12. Well, what does it look like for APAH to take in resident services interns from the local schools of social work and give them clinical hours so they can train in our buildings? And then again, that's a force multiplier. It's a way for us to, not have the expenses of the nonprofit, but a win-win. Take folks who are interested in doing social work as a field, coming to us for a year or two, helping us make an impact, and then maybe they can eventually become staffers at APAH when we have the budget. But that's what we're trying to move to now, because as Christopher and Jim mentioned, the funding for the services is not there. We don't have any ongoing source of funding for this right now. We have a big annual fundraiser that fortunately raises a lot of money, but it's about half the budget of the team. So we're constantly writing grants, but when you write grants, a lot of times you're kind of writing a grant for what the funder wants to give you, and it's maybe not exactly what your residents may want or what you want. So it would be so much better to have really flexible funding that's there to support the mission of the organization and what the residents say they need. I think that is our dream and something we are very much advocating for.
And I wanted to ask about systemic barriers and sort of policy constraints. We've touched on that some. My own observation is that even within the housing world of local government and it's actually local is more important than even state or federal in this regard. We encounter what we call silos. One group is interested purely in finance, but we've got land use and planners who don't think the same way that local government housing staffs think. We don't get the folks who deal with providing social services and funding for social services to think in exactly the same way as the land planners and the housing people think. And heavenly days, the people who run the Fairfax water and sewer system do not think in the same ways that the others think, and yet all of those have to be brought together as housing is developed. And how might either of you or both of you think about finding ways for the production of housing to tie all of these things together more effectively than they do now? Is it possible or a pipe dream? Christopher, maybe you've addressed some of it already.
I believe it is possible. I think there are barriers to it, and I think a lot of the barriers are in how funding now is available, the restrictions they give on the funding, whether it's HUD or other state and local entities. I think we need to completely redesign and rethink what affordable housing could look like if you could build in those social supports. I would even redesign how the building looks like and what sort of interiors there are, based on a model around what the healing nature of community. I think we're always trying to cut the costs because of the nature of the way things are funded. You have to build it as economically as possible. So you don't build in things like large kitchens that people could use, or common spaces, or build-in childcare centers that can be really state-of-the-art, or playgrounds, or areas where people can come together, support each other, get to know each other, feel like a community. And I think if you did that the right way, what you start to do is you create a culture in which people can aspire to and take advantage of services and really start making steps forward. You also have to create the scenarios in which people are not feeling like they would be jeopardized if they move up the economic ladder, that they won't lose the opportunity to have housing. There right now, I want to go back to this point because I think it's critical. There is really a gap between what you earn to be able to get into many affordable housing units and what it will cost if you go to market rate. And we want to be able to bridge that gap so people can aspire to more. As Carmen said, not everybody wants to be a homeowner. We found that a lot of our families do, but not everybody does. But they might have some other aspiration which can move them forward. And if you can build into that community ways of achieving it, ways of supporting each other, and ways of celebrating achievement, that community starts to aspire to something more than just holding on to what I've got. I think too often we create a scenario in which that person gets a voucher, or they get an affordable housing unit of one kind or another, and they just want to hold on to it and not give it up, because if they do, they're going to be homeless again. That's the wrong approach. We really want to create a culture of achievement for everybody. That's what we want for our own children. Think of what does a parent want for their child? They want their child to have every opportunity to excel, and they want to have the opportunity to do multiple different things, which is based on their skills, their aspirations, and their unique personality. If that kind of opportunity were built into these affordable housing units, people would really take advantage of it, I think, the way they don't now. And there would be greater turnover. One of the cool things that we're looking for in that housing that we hope to build or acquire is the opportunity to have more turnover in affordable housing. One of the arguments I frequently make when we talk about Homestretch is, in one of our units, in a period of 10 years, we'll house an average of 3 families, or about anywhere from 8 to 20 people. Whereas the average affordable housing unit in another complex will have 1 family. So we're serving 3 times that number. And when the families move out of our housing, they're either going to a long-term voucher, which is about 50%, or they're going into market rate. So they're exiting poverty by going into market rate because they've increased their income sufficiently. That means that kind of housing would be more effective because it would serve more people. So services, what I'm trying to point out is, have the right kind of services actually advances your goals for all these families, and advances the goal of enough affordable housing for everyone.
Well, some of the programs that are applied in, for example, the low-income housing tax credit deals that APAH does and that my company does, actually do have some of those things that you're describing, Christopher. There are physical requirements for the buildings that the allocators of the resources require. Carmen, maybe you can address some of the things that are built into as a requirement to the people who are using the low-income housing tax credit funding.
Yeah, and this is really driven by the state of Virginia that has an excellent program, and they do require community rooms of a certain size, 800 square feet approximately, in every new affordable housing development. They also incentivize free Wi-Fi in a big way, as well as certain features for housing, for example, that's senior housing, that it be universal design, as well as green housing, making sure that we are putting forward the right efficiency in terms of appliances and in terms of the window quality. I think I think the intent is there for incredibly high quality affordable housing that is equal to something that a market rate developer would build. The problem, as Jim showed you at the beginning of it, is it's expensive. So, it's sort of a cycle in the sense that it's beautiful, it's high quality. I think that the state is right to move those criteria forward, but it just ultimately becomes a capacity problem because you just don't have enough subsidy to then build the scale you need. So, ideally, it's really, if we get into what are the limiting factors, funding, gap funding is a limiting factor. And, you've got the municipalities doing it. You've got Amazon who came to, this region a few years ago. They're trying to step up and put forward their own version of housing equity money to try to move forward, trying to, encourage more production as part of their HQ2 investment here. But someone asked in the chat, and I, concur, it comes down to land too. You need a place to put it. And really, some neighborhoods and some areas are more supportive than others. So we do need to get to a place where, people, in neighborhoods embrace the need for affordable housing is something they want in their backyard and that they stand up for and that they will go testify in favor of, or that they will applaud when it happens. Because at the end of the day, and I think the faith community has a big part to play there, frankly, because you all have been really, at least in a lot of the projects we've been involved with, at the center piece of it, either through that advocacy that I talked about, either as a congregation or as part of an ecosystem with voice or someone else, or even leveraging your own holdings, as Christopher mentioned he's doing in Fairfax right now. And I know we did it with Arlington Presbyterian and Arlington. And those are, frankly, those are my favorite projects, because a project that's built in community with a church and a faith group, the vibrancy that it brings to that building when it comes online. I mean, I invite anyone to come see Gillian Place, Arlington Presbyterian's vision that completely came to fruition. It's, 160 homes for people, but beyond that, it is also a new church, and it's also a kitchen incubator. We've partnered with a nonprofit that opened up during COVID. She raised $3 million to build out a commercial kitchen and is able to launch businesses for chefs. Many of them are people of color, immigrant businesses that have launched during COVID. So, and I'm thrilled, people should come visit, but some of the write-ups, the Washington Post has listed a couple of them as some of the best cheap eats in DC. And this is all born of the vision of Arlington Presbyterian Church, who literally felt called from God to do three things, right? Affordable housing and to be a place of crossroads for their community. They wanted the housing, but they also felt that they wanted to draw people in. And what a beautiful vision that they've actually seen to fruition. People are being called in. They come into the cafe, they look around, where am I? They learn the history of affordable housing. They see the historic marker for Arlington Presbyterian Church with the stones from the original building that are, featured on the first floor of the facade. And then a beautiful outdoor worship space that they donated back to the community, where you go now, and there was a 200-person concert last Friday night where people, the Arlington Presbyterian Church got food trucks, and there was music, and it was our residents. I mean, it is, I think, when the faith community and, mission-minded developers can get together to try to solve a problem, I am optimistic. I think we can move the ball forward, and I think convenings just like this show that there's a lot of interest in how we can actually work together. One thing is to be educated on the problem. Another thing is to kind of be called to action. And I'll tell you, all the underwriters said no to Gillian Place. We got rejected up and down, but God said yes to the congregation, and God said yes to our partnership. And I really do feel that there's just something really incredible when, the faith community puts their mind to something, and it really gives us, the nonprofit developer, the strength to overcome really, challenge after challenge in getting something like this built.
Let me just cite some additional examples of such as the Arlington Presbyterian Church example that APAH worked with so successfully. Fairlington Presbyterian Church is working now with another nonprofit called Wesley Housing Development to do an affordable housing project on underutilized land there. This process got started with the Chesterbrook Presbyterian Church needing literally to wind itself down back in the early part of the first decade of the century. It called our church, Lewinsville Presbyterian, Emmanuel Presbyterian, and Temple Rodef Shalom, and built what I think is one of the great assets, community assets of Northern Virginia, called Chesterbrook Residences, which is an affordable assisted living facility. Great help from Fairfax County in doing that. I think it's United Methodist Church in Ballston is undertaking a major project there. The Westminster Presbyterian in the Wharf area of DC is doing something similar. There are an awful lot of congregations around the metropolitan area with underutilized land and declining memberships, and those situations create opportunities to use land, as Carmen suggested. That limited resource really matters. Finding ways to capture some of that is really important. And I should also mention that Enterprise Community Partners, a very large national nonprofit foundation based in Columbia, Maryland, has an organization within its fold that really focuses on this very thing. If one of you is listening in thinks that your church might, and I say church, religious organization of whatever type, might fulfill a need in this way, we urge you to get in touch with anybody on this meeting. We could all direct you to ways to try to use that important resource. What else? What have we missed, both Carmen and Christopher, about things that the religious organizations might do to address the problems? Either one?
Well, first of all, I think it is intrinsic to the gospel. So I think that when you talk to a faith community, you're talking to the converted. I think it's really just a question of coming up with a strategy that implements it. And actually, if you also build a housing that is rich in services, it gives more volunteer opportunities for people in the congregation. The congregation can actually get involved. Like a couple of examples you were talking about and Carmen was talking about. It gives an opportunity for an ongoing mission. So it really is a fulfillment of their calling as Christians. I think we just have to come up with strategies of how to find the partners that can implement it. And I think as you talk about these different resources, they're out there.
Anything to add to that point, Carmen?
No, I echo that. I think, to me, it's threefold, in terms of faith community. It's advocacy, being involved with county planners and elected officials when they're creating their goals for the municipalities. That really drives a lot of it. And when you have an affordable housing project that's on the books in your local community, being active and going to those meetings and speaking in favor of it, because in so many instances, it's kind of the near neighbors, detractors that are trying to derail a project, and having, I can't tell you how many times it's been the faith community that's shown up to our projects when we've been really at the stage of not being able, to really get the political support for something, and have done such a beautiful job stating why it's important. And that is really meaningful. And then, beyond that, discernment, if you do feel that there are land resources. It could be a multi-year process, but, reaching out and starting that conversation with, as Jim mentioned, there's a lot of groups out there that work with churches to just explore it. And it could be years, it could be 5-7 years of discernment. And I think people get scared sometimes when the topic of development and affordable housing comes up. But it can be done carefully.
I'm reminded of the process for getting Chesterbrook Residences, which I mentioned just a minute ago. The idea was presented to me and some of my colleagues in December of 2000. The building opened in November of 2007.
Yeah, that's right, Jim.
And that is not all that unusual about taking a really long time for something to move from germination to bloom. It's complicated. I wanted to get back to the conversation that I started with about how daunting the numbers are. Just to give you an example of the process that Fairfax County went through when they were trying to get a handle on what their contribution, their economic contribution might have to be in order to put a dent in the problem. George Mason University had provided a study for them, but the need at the time, which was I think 2018 or 2019, for an additional number of affordable units was about 30,000 in Fairfax County, for heaven's sakes. That was to provide housing for people at a price that they could afford, working in the range of maybe spending a third of their budgets, their household income on housing. Everybody immediately agreed that providing the literally billions of dollars that would be required to meet that goal wasn't realistic. So let's cut it back, some of us thought, to maybe $15,000 or 15,000 units to be built over a number of years. No, that was too daunting too. And we wound up settling on a goal that was approved by the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax of about 5,000 units of production. So I certainly don't mean to fault elected officials for this, because that still requires an enormous amount of resources. There are ways to do it. There are ways to provide resources without simply putting cash into transactions that result in the production of units. Land use patterns, land use requirements are a major factor there. Finding resources at well below what their market value might otherwise be from churches and other institutions, but that's all a very long, wordy introduction to the need for advocacy, which I would be. Carmen used that word again a minute ago. It's absolutely essential to this process, and I hope the people listening in will join the effort to advocate for resources for housing, but also for all of the services, the enrichment of the programs that go along with affordable housing that both Christopher and Carmen have been describing. Absolutely essential. From a church's standpoint, Christopher made an excellent point, which is that these facilities that the churches have an impact on creating provide the opportunities for continuing service, and that is certainly happening at Chesterbrook Residences, which I am still an important part of, I think, and the same thing would be true for the facilities that both APAH and Homestretch can use.
Jim?
Please.
Yeah, do you see the chat there? There's a couple of questions I think that people have.
Nope.
Well, then
You please, you take care of it, James, please.
I'll be happy to, because I want to make sure folks have a chance to
Yes.
answer the questions. Actually, let me start out by asking Ken if he has a quick question there. You have your hand up. You want to just go ahead and say it? Maria, you want to unmute Ken McMillan?
Thank you for recognizing me.
No problem.
I'm not new to this area of housing and everything, but I've been advocating for affordable housing for some 20 years or more.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm on the ground. I like to be that place because I can get closer to the people that actually have the need and understand how can we help them once I find out what the need is. So just let me give you a real quick background of me. I was homeless back in 2003, 2004, 2005. Home Depot hired me at $15 an hour in 2005 while I was sleeping in the woods. I helped develop and assisted people that ended homelessness in 10 years for Jerry Connolly. I know people in fastest and so forth and so on. I sit on the board for the CAB, the Community Advisory Action Board. I sit on APAH. I know Jim Edmondson, and I believe, I believe I know Jim Edmondson. I've seen his name before, but I do know, where are you? Harriet and Jerry Hopkins. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I put it up in the chat, nobody answered it. What part of zoning do you think hinders the ability to get affordable housing? Now, we know in Fairfax County, 1.2 million people in the county, but what are they building now? You know, back when I was growing up, my mother and father bought their first and only house in an all-white neighborhood. And we don't know how they got in there, but we did. But that's usually the stepping stone of people who are coming out of school, college, and everything like that. They get married, and the first thing they do is they find an apartment to rent. And they use that as a stepping stone to get into housing. And we see that part of the equation missing now. Everybody's building condos, townhouses, but nobody's building apartment buildings anymore. Now, the working class has to have a stepstone to be able to get to where they want to be to own their own home. And if we take that out of the equation, it takes some years, or in some cases, they never get the chance to afford a house. So you see where I'm going with this. So the zoning, we realized that single family home zoning is a problem here, and as always has been. And I wonder what part of zoning needs to change. The other thing I want to put in here real quick, you'll see me, all of the supervisors of Fairfax County know who I am, because every time there's a chance to testify on why we need something, they know I'm going to be right there. As a matter of fact, one time I spent 8 hours sitting in there waiting to speak up until 2 o'clock in the morning, listening to the planning commission, just to let them know that, hey, I got your back. If you do something good, I'm going to support you. And I didn't have a way home. The buses stopped running. So I'm here at 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, I guess I'm going to sleep here tonight. But I want to know what you all are doing. I heard everything that everybody said here. What are you doing to try to get that back into the mix?
Okay. Well, let me address that a little bit, and I think Carmen might address it too. The density of housing units that applies in as comprehensive plans are created in the various municipalities is historically low. In Great Falls, a lot of the land is zoned for a house per 5 acres. Obviously, that's not conducive to the to preparing and building affordable housing. Many of the municipalities are recognizing that they've got to address density concerns. It requires some boldness on the part of elected officials, because current residents in no matter which jurisdiction they're in are never happy about adding significant density. They seem to think in many cases that it reduces their own single family property values, but those are issues that need to be addressed over time. One way, and as a matter of fact, the project that Carmen and Carmen's organization and mine are working on in Loudoun County, we took working with a landowner a parcel of some size. It was 22 plus or minus acres, and working with him, we found about 3 acres where the density would be much higher, and that's where the apartment project we're developing is going. And that kind of idea is being replicated in other places, and it can make sense. Obviously, if you have to build one house per 1 acre or 1/3 of an acre, or let alone 5 acres, you're not going to make affordable housing. You got to have higher density. It's frequently a political battle. What do you think, Carmen?
I agree and appreciate the question from Ken. I mean, it is a matter that it shouldn't take 5 years, 7 years to bring a project to fruition. A lot of that time is really bureaucracy and process and changing this plan and changing that plan and stepping through a very complex, expensive set of, hazards to get to the end game that at the end of the day can fall apart without support. We really need we need a way to cut red tape, because we're never going to fix the problem if we don't have changes to the zoning ordinance that are holistic and saying, for a project that's, moving forward an agenda of affordable housing for the county, we're going to find a way to fast track it and give it a 6-month approval. I'm doing a project in Arlington, and for the first time, they passed this year a zoning ordinance amendment to allow for unlimited bonus density for affordable housing and up to 6 additional stories on your underlying zoning for affordable housing. So we went through our first review committee with the neighbors, and we're building 500 units there is what we're moving forward on. And one of them is going to be a senior affordable housing component. The other is multifamily.
I'm well aware of that because I've been tracking Arlington for county for a while now. But let me give you a little small, quick scenario that we did before the new board of supervisors came up. So we know that new supervisors are going to run for election, right? So we had a symposium where we asked 5 supervisors that are on the board of supervisors now. We say we got them elected, but the way we got them elected was, we sheltered homelessness, not during the pandemic, but the year before that, 2019. So we had those running for office come down and sit with us at our places of worship, where the people running for office were sitting and talking to people who were actually homeless. And because we built up such a cadre of people that are now intuitive in the Walter Eichhorn, Dahlia Palachuk, Rodney, I can't think of all the names, but this is what we did. And those symposiums helped get them elected. So it's a way of bargaining with the county officials to see that we have a problem here. And when I asked it, we just got a new police chief, you know what question I asked him? I said, how many of the Fairfax County police officers live in Fairfax County? He said, probably about 10%. I said, so people are talking about defunding the police and everything like this. Wouldn't it be awesome if the police officers actually lived in the neighborhood that they police? He said, yeah. I said, then how come we're not doing anything about that? You can ask the teachers. How many of y'all live in Fairfax County? Every place I go, if I go into Safeway, I ask where the person that's helping me in Safeway, where do they live? If they're working in Fairfax County and they're living in Loudoun County, you have to ask yourself why. So these are the things that I'm trying to get around to. So like I said, I'm going to step out of here now, but I'm giving you some ideas, and y'all, every one of you are going to see a lot of me coming soon. Okay.
And thanks a lot for all those great insightful comments. They are really right on the mark. I'm gonna jump and just let some folks ask some quick questions, and this is the quick question time and quick answer time. So I'm gonna run through the chat box and pull it out there. We start out with Connie Church, who asked a question to Carmen: How long do clients stay in APAH housing? What is the next step for these residents? And we'll hold that thought. I'm going to ask another question. This is Harriet and Jerry Hopkins. Good to see you. how much of the affordable housing is an income problem? So I specified and stressed the multidimensional nature. They're saying, well, really, how much is just an income? Many people, maybe they don't need the services. So that's another question for everyone to ask. Courtney Nuzzo, who's the head of LRR in town, one of the partner groups with our church, Lewinsville Retirement Residence. She asked the questions, could the speakers comment on groups that are in need of housing, families, older adults, or disabled? Where's the priority there? And so that, I think, finishes up the questions that are remaining. So go to it. Keep it short.
Yeah, I think it may be dated, but I was around 7 years was our average tenancy when I checked a few a bit ago. So I will get you the right answer if that's wrong. And then yes, not everyone needs services. I think you have some folks that are higher on the income spectrum, the 60%, you know, making $60,000 a year for a family of 4. They may be really just there for the rent and then saving to buy a home. And we do have people who go on from living in our housing to becoming homeowners. And there's really, to us, you know, we equally prioritize families, older adults. There is, you know, we're doing our first couple of senior housing on the books now in Loudoun County with Jim, and then in Fairfax that we just broke ground on. But for the most part to date, we have been kind of a family affordable housing developer. And Christopher, I'm going to cede my time to you.
Well, I agree with you. I find it hard to prioritize those groups because I actually think they're all in need. And there's often some overlap. An aged person can really end up living on a very slim income, and disabilities and homelessness are very much linked. So I actually think I would look at all those groups as being equal in income. And I also agree, not everybody needs the services, but I think that if the services are available and easy to access, more people will move up.
So I'd like to jump in here if I could. Jim, do you want to go ahead and answer?
I was just going to say that our experience is the turnover in our affordable units is a little more frequent than the 7 years Carmen cited it. But we have a lot of units in Washington, D.C. itself, and the turnover rate there it's more like 4 years. But the need and the priorities of the type of housing that's being produced, to some extent, is set politically by the local government. Their assessment of their needs varies over time. And those of us who are wanting to provide the units have to adjust our sites to reflect what the local elected officials want.
So I thought I'd jump in here, and I wanted Phil Church, who kind of put this whole idea together. After evaluating all that you've heard and all you've seen, what's missing? What question needs to be asked of the folks here?
I guess what role we can play, Chris and Carmen, both of your websites have volunteer forms to fill out, for example. In Tysons Interfaith, we've been discussing this issue around the fact there's a lot of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young professionals working in the region now. What opportunities are there for those with skills in the legal area, financial area, perhaps to do mentoring or coaching of the residents and participants in your two programs? To just give you an example, one member of our congregation works for a large company in Tysons Corner that provides up to 40 hours of paid leave per week per year for community service activities. That's a week a year. Multiply that by the workforce in Tysons Corner, and you have a lot of paid annual paid work days that could be directed into coaching, mentoring, other types of programs. Is there scope there? And if so, how can we get word out to our congregations and friends about it?
Well,
go ahead, Carmen.
Well, I was going to ask for specifically in the Tysons area, we have a project that we have under contract to build affordable housing in Tysons at Dominion Square off of Spring Hill. That's going to go to the Board of Supervisors for their approvals in the next 60 to 90 days. And that's going to be, the first phase of it, 175 family homes in Tysons. I think one of the largest in Tysons to date, if not the largest. We would love to be in partnership with the faith community as that comes online, getting, volunteers in there, everything from welcome baskets to those 175 families to mentorship or other ways to really welcome those families in when they move into your area. And Christopher, if you want to, sorry.
Yes, we definitely rely on volunteers. What we do is actually talk to each volunteer or volunteer group to find out exactly what they would like to do and how that fits with us and try and tailor it to them. So for example, we have accountants that help us do taxes for our clients every year. We have handymen who do projects for us. We do have groups that come in and work with our kids in the preschool or do landscaping projects or maybe stage a home for a new family. We have lots of ways that we can use volunteers, either in your area of expertise or simply doing something that you love to do that you could help with one of the families. I just encourage you to contact us. We have a full-time volunteer manager who's very good, who would work with whoever contacts us to find out what that right fit is.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, James.
All right. Well, I think this is the time that we shut it down. I promised till 5:04, but people were very succinct. So congratulations on a really wonderful presentation, very insightful and full of heart in addition, which was really well received by me and I'm sure many of us in the audience. So from McLean, just saying goodbye until the next time on Pathways Out of Poverty in Northern Virginia. See you next time.
Thank you
so much, James.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Adios.